we were in the Ramah in Kufir Beis Halacha above. The Mechaber and the Ramah had talked about eggs that are mixed into a batter or on top of a batter. But now the Ramah says, and this type of batter, which we call kichlach, which the Mishnah Berurah in Hilchos Brachos says is a batter that you make with a lot of eggs in it. Okay, there's a machlokes say whether it means it's completely with eggs with no water or it has water, but it's a very eggy batter. Or you mean misika shekarin lekach, or a different kind of sweet thing, which the Ramah there in Hilchos Brachos says either it's a bread that has some kind of a lot of spices or honey, some kind of a cake. Okay, some kind of a cake, a sweet tasting cake. Hey, b'chlal pas, they're considered pas. And so the kula that we have, or that pas palter, applies to these things, even though these things are not pas. So therefore they're not included in the halachas of bishlach, and they're included in the kula of pas palter. And therefore, if you and the point here, the chiddush is that even though you don't make hamaitzi on these foods, you only make mazonos on these foods, they're considered pas, and you make, and they're in the kula of pas palter. Okay, now the Rambam is not telling us is that if you don't hold of the din of pas palter, that's like the mechaber to hold of the kula of pas palter, it's considered pas l'chumra also. The chumra being that you won't have the kula of ein oil shulchan lachem or something like that. Okay, the Rambam is telling us for what usually is a kula, that this food is considered pas, and therefore it has the kula for sure for the Rambam of pas palter. Okay, let's just finish the din because the other part is not negay.
Why is it considered pas? Only because of mezainis, or because
I'm getting to it. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to finish the Rambam just to finish it.
Okay, fine.
I'm going to explain. There's another kind of batter that's also called kichlach. So if you know some barzlin, they bake it on steel rods. It's more like pour it onto the thing. It bakes right on a hot, like on a spit. And the practice is that they would grease those spits with chalev or pig fat. So for those, they're also for a different reason. They're not also because of bishlakim. They're also because of tarfa. So the minute say machal about those things. And the reason why the Rambam is bringing here, not only because it's a related din, is because one of the documentaries right is that this din is true. That the first din is true that you could be mako is from this I forgot who it is, who's bringing this din about don't eat it because of the treif of it. Aside for the bishlakim wouldn't have been a problem because it would have been considered pot. That's how the surah came in here. But it's like a side din is to that this food has they grease the pan, they grease the spits with some kind of a fat, so therefore you shouldn't eat it. Okay. Now, the Beis Yosef for this din is in Kufit Gimel. Okay, and over there, the Beis Yosef brings 3 shitas. Okay, he brings 3 different shitas. The first shita is tashbitz, okay, which I did not see, but the tashbitz that he brings says that he had a food that was made with flour and honey, and he wasn't sure whether the flour is the ikar or the honey is the ikar. Okay, so at the beginning he thinks that the flour is the ikar of that food, so it's considered a pas kind of a food. It's some kind of a cake, I'm guessing, some kind of a cake, and so the pas is considered pas, but he says the kula of pas palter is because it's so important to have bread, and it's so hard to get bread from a yid. Therefore, Chazal will make that pas palter is mutter. Okay, so since the kula is only for cases of great need, there's no great need to eat Haba'ah B'kisnin. The whole kula is only for things that are pas. This stuff which is not pas, they will mat the real pas, but stuff like this which is not real pas, Chazal will not mat such a food like that. Okay, so that's what he says. What he's saying is that we have to remember that the kula of pas palter is a kula. You're being let off the hook because there's a doichak, you're stuck, there's nothing to eat. So therefore, that we can only say that for things where you're really stuck. Okay, so when you're really stuck, then you can say that. It's all about the shita of the mechaber. When you have no other choices, then you can take it. But no one's going to die if they don't eat cake. So let them. So we say let them eat bread. You know, okay. You know. So we say let them eat bread. So you don't have to be stuck and eat cake. You can eat bread. Okay. So there's no kula pas palter. That's what Tashbitz says. Okay. It happens to be there's a side point that he comes out that it's. Let me get a little to the Ramah. A side point which is that he holds the honey is there in that food, so it's not considered a pas. It's in the rules of bishlakim, which makes it mutter. Okay, he says it's mutter. I think it's mutter mean because the honey is nechachai. So if the honey is the ikar, it becomes mutter for a side reason.
Or is not rather Shulchan Malachim?
He, I don't think we need to say that. It could be, but I don't think we need to say that even because honey is just nechachai. Just put that on the side. But the point for negate to us is that when he thought that the flour was the main part of the food, he said that it is considered pas, but even though it's pas, it's not in the kula pas palta because who needs it? I mean, bread, you need to have bread and rolls and bagels, but to have cake, that there's no reason to make it. Then he brings a taisus. He brings it from an ogre, bringing a taisus, who has two shitas. Sorry. Okay. The first shita is that he had a food like this also. Also a food like this was possible because it means the food you don't make hamoitzi on. And he said, if you don't make hamoitzi on the food, it's not pas. For the rules of what's considered pas and what's considered not pas, it depends on if you make hamoitzi on it. If you make hamoitzi, then it's pas. So you don't make hamoitzi on this food. It's a cake. You make mezainis on it. So since you make mezainis on it, it's not considered pas. So of course there's no heter pas palta. Like I don't have to explain to you why there's no heter pas palta. No heter pas palta because it's not pas. It's the rules of bishul hakum. Okay, and then we go to the regular rules of bishul hakum. It's not nechachayim. It would be oil shulchan, so it would be also. Okay, that's the first sheet of Taisus. Then Taisus brings a second sheet. This is Taisus in Be'er. Taisus brings a second sheet of Rabbi Yechiel, who says that since if you would eat enough of this food and you'd be kivei suda, you would make hamoitzi on it. So it is considered pas. And since it's considered pas, it has the kula of pas palter, and therefore it's mutter just like pas palter.
Not totally in the bracha.
Okay. Well, it's totally in the bracha, but since this food is a hamoitzi food, because if you'd be kavei suda, you wouldn't make hamoitzi on the food. If you ate enough of it, you'd make hamoitzi. So it is in the category of foods called pas because you'd make hamoitzi on it, and therefore it's included in the kula of pas palter.
Why would you make hamoitzi? What kind of bread is this?
It's a cake. It's cake of Haba'ah B'kisnin.
So that's interesting. The Haba'ah B'kisnin, it's only one case. We have three sekas.
Correct.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Here would be mekel because it's not going to be Haba'ah B'kisnin chonadeyas.
Right. That's true. That is an interesting point. That we're good. No. You make a mistake. The days that hold that it's not possible, that it's not Messiah, hold that it's real pas. So they did a pas palta version. Right. Yeah. So it's easy.
You have a kula.
Right. There's more.
You have a kula pas palta.
I didn't think of it, but that's true. Okay. So kind of we have three sheetas. There's three sheetas going on over here. The Kashrus holds that it is pas, but there's no kula possible of pas palta because there's no dochak to eat it. There's no dochak to eat it, so there's no kula. The first sheet in Taisus holds it's not pas. Well, if it's not pas, then of course it's not pas palta. And the second sheet in Taisus holds that it is pas, and it is included in the kula of pas palta. Okay. Now when I say the second sheet, the last sheet, it's not so clear what he's saying. I believe what he's saying. Now. The first sheet, the attachments, like I said, is sort of in line with what the Machaber had been saying all along, which is that we're only matter it in cases when you really need it. So therefore, for example, the Machaber holds you only matter it in cases when there's nothing else available, no pasi sol available. So the attachments is along those lines. It's like a bigger picture, which is like you never have a doicha to eat cake. You can live without cake. Nothing's going to happen to you. So therefore, that's like a bigger picture that says you're never allowed to eat pas palter, which is possible B'kisnin. Even if there's none available, even if there's no passes available, because just you don't have to eat it all together. Okay. Now the middle shita, the first sheet of Taisus, is that it is not pas. Okay, it's not clear to me what that shita holds. What is the shita? What's the machlokes between the second shita and the third shita? The second shita says that it's not pas, and the third shita says it is pas. What's the machlokes? Okay, so let's say like this: the third shita that says it is pas is in a way the simpler shita to understand. Why? Because in Hilchos Challah, we have to decide if a food is lechem or it's not lechem, and the din is Haba'ah B'kisnin is lechem. Things that this kind of cakes, you have to be mafresh challah for them. So in those halachas, for other halachas, we do consider this stuff to be pas. I'm not sure what the second day holds. My feeling is that the second day is sort of like a compromise from what the Tashbin said. What I mean is like this: the Machaber holds that you have to judge every time you pick up a piece of pas palta. You have to say, do I need this food? Could I get it someplace else? If I could get pasi sol, you're not allowed to eat it. If it's like the Tashbin says, if it's a food that I'm not so desperate to eat this food because I can eat other foods instead of it, can't eat it either. Okay? And this shita is like sort of like a compromise that maybe you don't have to judge every food one at a time, like the Ramah says. If you pas palta, you can eat it all the time. But in defining what is pas and what's not pas, that much we take into consideration. I mean, what is the Rama hold? The Rama holds pas palto is mutter all the time because of the doichak. Therefore, they will matter pas palto always. It's always mutter. Why would they do that? It's sort of like a light plug. Once they said it, they said it. But in saying that, you can use a little seichel also and say in deciding what is pas and what's not pas, they didn't have to go so far as to include pas Haba'ah B'kisnin into pas also. So the middle shita is, I might be just saying is, you might not, if you have a food, you have pas palta and there's no pas Yisroel available, you could maybe be allowed to eat it. But in defining what is pas and what's not pas, for that we'll say there's no reason to include pas Haba'ah B'kisnin into pas also. So we don't have to be makeup. Okay, I'm not sure. I was surprised even that I didn't see more people explaining what the machlokes is in the second and third shita. That's in these simple. Okay.
You went through cases of, where's this cases of there?
It has Zion base, I think it is.
Bottom
Bottom base, right? Bottom base, I think. If I remember correctly. Begin at the bottom of a... What am I looking at?
My dog, that one, my dog over there?
Bottom of a base. I don't remember. It's on the bottom of a base. Has Zion base. Okay. The Dark Moshe is in two different places, here and there. And our Ramah took the most Mekel Shita of these three. He took the most Mekel Shita. He said that Pas B'kisnin is Pas, and it has the Kula Pas Palta. Okay? So, there's a side shiloh going on over here, which is, the Tashma, as I told you, says that this food is not considered Pas, is considered Pas, but it's not included in the Kula Pas B'kisnin. The Dr. Moshe wants to say that maybe that's only because there's a Blila Raka. Okay? He differentiates between a Blila Raka and a Blila Ova. Maybe by Blila Ova, we're more inclined to say that it should be considered Pas, and not by Blila Raka. That Shiloh goes on to a Shach and a Beis Meir. Rebelsky was making. I'm not
Then you'd have the Chumrah Bishul.
Right. Well, we'll have the Chumrah Bishul, but it has the
Pancakes.
Pancakes. Okay, we're getting to pancakes.
I was ready for that because
but
it's on the bottom.
You see it.
With no. With the halacha, with the pouring on the griddle.
Right. So there's a shiloh in the shach and a Beis Meir about that. Okay. So I'm not putting that on the side. Okay. Now, there's one question just for thought is how come the Mechaber doesn't say this thing? Okay. The Mechaber brings himself, putting the Tashbis on the side. He brings Tashbis with 2 days on it, where the Pas B'kisnin, a food which you don't make hamaitzi on, you only make hamaitzi if you're kaveh suda, and he has 2 days in Tashbis as to whether that food is included in the Kula Pas Palta or it's not included. So a little bit I was surprised that the Mechaber doesn't bring it. Why doesn't the Mechaber say it? I mean, the Beis Yisrael happens to be Kufi Gimel, but bring it here or there, someplace. Say now. Maybe I missed it. I don't see that the Shulchan Aruch brings this in of what. It seems like a very straightforward question. What is pas and what's not pas? It seems like so. One thing the Mechaber said before was that to be pas, it has to be from the Chameshus Mini Dagan, only from those 5 grains. Good. Okay. But what about this? This seems like a very obvious question. Is do cakes, are they included in pas palta or they're not included in the Kula pas palta? Okay, so at first I thought that the Mechaber maybe is including it in the beginning of the din. Because the Mechaber says, if you have a food that has eggs, a bread that has eggs mixed into it, so he says you don't have to worry about bishul akum on the eggs because they're considered tuffle to the bread and they're not bishul akum on it. Mm-hmm. So wait a second. If there's eggs in the bread, then that means the bread might be possible to kissing. If you put enough eggs into the bread would get a strong taste of egg in it, it would become possible to kissing. Well, so then forget about whether the egg should have bishul akum on the egg, but doesn't the cake have bishul akum on it? Am I making sense? If you have flour and water, you make hamaitzi. If you put other things into it, enough of other things into it, then what happens? It turns into cake, and it becomes mezainis. It has a strong taste of other things. So it says here you had bread with eggs mixed into it, and the Mechaber is saying, don't worry about bishul akum on the eggs. Well, wait a second. Well, what about the bread? You're saying, so it's mutter as pas palta, but the bread has eggs into it. If it has eggs in it, if it has eggs in it, so then it becomes possible kissing. And the Mechaber is like, that's obvious, that's not a problem. Okay, so you'll tell me that. The Mechaber doesn't mean that. Maybe it just had little eggs in it. Right? It doesn't have to have enough eggs to it.
So what would be the Kashrus?
No, I'm trying to say is why didn't the Mechaber bring this din of whether Passover B'kisnin is pas or it's tashul? And I'm saying he is saying that. By the fact that he could say a case that bread with eggs in it means to say that that's considered in pas also. You don't need to have, even if it had a lot of eggs, it doesn't say how many eggs in it. You could have lots of eggs in it, it would still be Passover B'kisnin. Okay? So you might tell me that it's not right, because, maybe you just had a little case. So there's a dig. I want to tell you a dig in the documentation Dr. Moshe says, after he brings these shilas about whether it's pas or it's not pas, whether you have the cool or not, he says, "V'gam yesh lumod lahater midine nilosh." This is in Kufi Gimel. He's saying this. Midine nilosh shenispar le'el sim Kufi Beis. The document says, if you should know, there's a raya lahako from the din of nilosh, which is back in Kufi Beis. Okay, now I think that I went through the Torah and Beis of that, and the only nilosh that's in Kufi Beis, okay, that I could see, is this din, where the Torah says that if you have bread that was nilosh with eggs, there's no bishlakim on the eggs. Okay, so what does he bring the raya from? What's the raya from there to the din of Haba'ah B'kisnin? So, well, it would sound like he understood that when the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch say that bread mixed with eggs, there's no bishlakim on the eggs, it's sort of included in that of course there's no bishlakim on the bread part of it, even though there's lots of egg to it and might have a strong taste to it, which would potentially make it into Haba'ah B'kisnin. Okay, so we'll leave it as a question. But the Ramah, which is what we need to know about, is the Ramah says that Haba'ah B'kisnin is considered pas and has the kula of pas palta. Okay, now there are three. We're using the word Haba'ah B'kisnin, but there's three kinds of pas, as David mentioned. There's three kinds of Haba'ah B'kisnin. One is, well, before we get to the examples of it, what's the point? What is the din of Haba'ah B'kisnin? Is bread you make hametzi on it. It's a staple food. Bread and rolls and things like that. It's a staple food. You make hametzi on it. Bread is not used as a staple. Bread is used as a snack food. It's not being used in its main purpose as a staple food, as a snack. Then you don't make the same bracha on it. You make the brachas mesoinus. If you kaveh suda, you take the snack food and turn it back into a meal food, then you make hametzi like it's supposed to be. Okay, bread is hametzi. If you use it as if you have a kind of bread that's meant for snacking, it's mesoinus. But if you take that snacking food and turn it back into a meal food, then it goes to hametzi.
So, for example, you have those cocktail breads. They're not cocktail bread. Though there's a famous company out there under the OU. They're like long. They slice them. They're thin, and they make canopies with them, and they put little locks on it, and they serve it for hors d'oeuvres.
They're hard. They're crackers.
They're bread. I can make a sandwich.
They're bread-like.
They're soft. They're bread-like. Okay. But the purpose is they're called cocktail breads.
Okay.
And they go ahead and they make it and they serve it at by schmorgs and everything like that.
No, that's not amazing. It's regular bread. It's very small. That's all.
But it's made against
soft pretzels. You mean like bagel chips? Like the bagel chip shiloh.
We have to think about that.
Not like the bagel chip shiloh.
We'll think about that. Okay, that's a good question.
because mama's made for cocktails.
That's not bagel chip shiloh.
You can't eat most of the soft
You know
pretzels.
what I'm talking about? They had them at Phil's dinner.
So why did the Shivas...
Rupschlager.
What did he do?
Oh, you kids that had
You know
Rupschlager.
what everyone was doing? They were watching.
Yeah, they watch.
No, they were emptying off the meat.
Yeah, I know, and leaving the bread there. But if it's made for cocktails,
It's a good question. Put it on the side. That's a good question. So there's three main. The Shulchan Aruch brings three types of Haba'ah B'kisnin. Three examples of it. Like David said, there's a machlokes which one it is. There's three, and we're making about all of that. One is if the flour and water that are mixed together have something else in there that gives it a strong taste, like it has chocolate or sugar or honey in it, it has a strong taste to it, what we would call cake. Okay, so those things are not what you make a staple out of, you use it as a snack. That's one kind of Haba'ah B'kisnin. Another kind is that the flour and water itself have a plain, a blander taste to them, but you put something else into it, you filled it, like you made a pie. Okay, the second case is pie, so then that's not the way you eat it as a staple food. Okay, and the third case is that you have plain flour and water, there's nothing else there, but you bake it in such a way that it comes out brittle and crunchy like a cracker. That's also not used as a staple. Okay,
pretzel.
so like a pretzel. So those kind of things, those three things, either it's a cake, or it's a pie, or it's a cracker, those three are examples of things that are Haba'ah B'kisnin. You don't usually eat them as food. But what Yankee was mentioning is what happens if you have a thing that doesn't meet one of these three criteria, doesn't meet one of these three, it seems like breadish, but for some other reason it's not used for food. Okay, which is
not
for a staple.
Right, for a staple.
Okay, so put that on the side. That's a separate child. It's like Hilchos Brachos. Okay, now, so that's a Haba'ah B'kisnin, and any of those things that say a cake is in the kula of pas palta. Okay, but now there's two other ways for a food to not be pas also. There's two other ways for food to get out of the din of pas.
So you have to have a tzura?
The first one is that it has to have tzuras toya lechem or turisa d'na'ama. It has to have some kind of something that gives us the impression of it being bread-like. Okay? Where does that thing come from? Tyson says that even though pasta is made from plain flour and water, doesn't have anything else in it, that it has also a soft, it doesn't have a brittle consistency, and when you cook it, it's it's soft. He says, even so, even if you make a meal out of it, which plenty of people do, even if you make a meal out of it, you don't make hametzi because it doesn't have teresa in the ham. It doesn't have toya alecha. It doesn't seem to be bread-like. Okay? He doesn't explain what does he mean, why. I mean, it's true. We all look at it and we say, pasta doesn't look like bread. But what is it about the pasta that makes it not have toya alecha? That's another hilchos bracha. We'll talk about some examples of it. Okay?
What would be the difference with pizza, for example? You kiveh sudan, so it also doesn't have a entire lechem.
So pizza would be considered that it does have, because the dough of it is bread-like. Okay, don't forget about the sauce. Just the dough of it is very bread-like. I mean, it's cut into a certain shape, but it's basically bread-like. As opposed to a pasta, it has a whole different look to it. Okay, what exactly that means, I can't tell you. Okay? I can't clearly define what it is. Okay, okay. So now, but just before we get into some of the examples, you have to remember that when you make pasta out of what's called a blila ova, which is to say the batter that you make is a thick batter, okay? And even that kind of case where it has a thick batter, it's potentially not considered food, not considered lechem, because it doesn't have a Torah lechem. That is to say, things that have a watery batter, like pancakes, something that are much more watery, or waffles, or sponge cake, much more watery, those are easier to call those not lechem. Okay, but here, even the case of Tosfos is using, which is pasta, is a thing which is blila ova, and that doesn't stop us. If you take a blila ova and you make it into a thing that doesn't have a tzur of lechem, it's still not lechem. That's okay. Okay, so now, an example. I'm going to go through a few examples.
Go by the dough or by the finished product?
By the finished product. It goes by the finished product.
Mm-hmm. I'm talking about pasta's cooked, right?
No, we cook it afterwards. When they do it, they just cut it and dry it out.
Okay, that's the second reason. We'll get to that second.
Take the company one day.
Okay.
I've been there.
We're talking about cook. We're talking about cooked pasta. That's what we're talking about. Okay, but yes, it is cooked. So now the Magen Avraham.
Yeah, to eat it, you got to cook it.
Yeah, but
Not in the bag.
It's not edible.
No, my elbow macaroni is not cooked yet?
No.
You're cooking for the first time?
Yes.
Yes.
The morning of the you deal with cows.
You can't eat it without cooking.
You know where milk comes from.
Okay. Why, if you mention it, why you mention it, it's worth noting, just as an aside point, is that there is such a thing as pre-cooked pasta, particularly in lasagna. It's worth mentioning. Lasagna is pre-cooked. Yes, it's a shal b'shlan.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, it is a shal b'shlan.
It is.
and raw items have more problems with saliva.
Okay.
If it sits around for yashan.
Okay, that's a normal pasta.
Okay.
Well, we'll talk later.
So the Magen Avraham, who explains the Dinim in Al-Chaber, the Magen Avraham in Hilchos Brachos says, he describes two different foods. Okay, and I'm going to use our kind of words. I'm going to use our kind of words. I'm going to use our kind of words to describe it. He doesn't use these words. He uses some Yiddish words. Okay, I'm going to use our kind of words to describe it. Okay, and he's like this. If you make, he says, if you make a batter, you make a product that's of the thickness, be'erach, what we would like a pancake thickness. Okay, that thing is considered lechem. Now the Magen Avraham and the Mechaber argue as whether it's always hamoitzi or it's only hamoitzi if you kaveh suda. Okay, but again, to our point, it's not important to us because for us, we consider it pas in either case, whether it's you kaveh suda or you're not kaveh suda. That's not important to us. It's in the family of lechem. He says, but if you make it not like that kind of thickness, but paper thin, okay, which in his description is you take this batter and you pour it onto a hot iron, and it spreads out and gets paper thin. He says that thing, no matter how much you eat of it, you don't make hametz in it. It's not lechem. It doesn't have a Torah lechem. It's so thin, no way that has a Torah lechem. Okay.
Egg roll skins.
Okay, so
egg roll skins.
So the more
There is something very, very thin.
Yeah.
What is it called?
wraps.
Tortillas.
They're called wraps. Right. So wraps. So that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. So the wraps, the Magen Avraham says that they're not considered lechem. No matter what you do with them, they're not considered lechem. I mean, even if you're kaveh suda, you don't make hametzi on those kind of foods. And in your nenu, in your bishlakim, what's again to us is that thing, if it is not considered pas, means it's in the rules of bishlakim. If it's in the rules of bishlakim, you don't have the cool of pas pater. You have to treat like bishlakim. It's obviously not nechachai, and you have to judge whether it is or is not oila shulchan. That's for a different din when we'll get to that. Whether it is or is not oila shulchan, whether the wraps are oila shulchan. But it's not pas because you can't make hametzi. No matter what you do, you can't make hametzi in it. So therefore, that's why I introduced you by telling you. Even though now the case of the Magen Avraham is by case of a blil rock. That's the case he's using to describe as a case of a blila raka. But as I said to you, that's a practicality. Because the case where the din of Torah Lechem comes from is a case of blila lava. The fact that it's a blila raka for him is a technicality. That was the way he did it. You had a blila raka to make a thin thing. You need to have a watery dough.
Why?
Because as I said before, the din of Torah Lechem comes from the din of pasta, which is not a blila raka, it's a blila ava. The blila ava and raka don't decide whether it should be Torah Lechem or not. Torah Lechem depends, like David said, on the finished product. When the finished product does it have a Torah Lechem or doesn't have it? Whether the history was a blila raka or blila ava doesn't make a difference. Blila ava could make you Torah Lechem or not. His case happens to have been that it was a blila raka, because that would be, for him, the normal way to get a really thin thing is to start with something very watery. If you started with something thick, it wouldn't come out thin like that. We have a way of doing that, even with a thick thing, to make a very thin product out of it. But that's the way I see it, is that it's just a practical thing for him that it was a blila raka. Blila ava could also not have a Torah Lechem. The din of Torah Lechem doesn't depend on whether it has a blila raka. Okay? Okay. Now yes, that's correct. That's why he's arguing from the back. Okay. The another example of this is breakfast cereals. Okay, you could argue about this one. So I'm going to mention even that.
Cheerios.
Breakfast cereals, like Cheerios, where most people say that they do not have Torah Lechem. Okay, that they say is if pasta doesn't have Torah Lechem, these little pieces like this are also not a Torah Lechem. I'm not sure if it's because their size or because they're. I'm not. Whatever.
You're not specific about Cheerios. You're not talking about the other ones.
I'm talking about most breakfast cereals are not considered that. Well, many breakfast cereals don't have chamishas minidogan. But the ones that do have chamishas minidogan in them are considered. Most people say that they do not have a Torah Lechem. Okay, but Rabbi first says.
You retracted.
No. Rabbi first says. I'll correct what he said. Rabbi first says that they do have Torah Lechem. Okay, they do have Torah Lechem. He knows that they're just. I forgot who he said it from, but he said that they do have Torah Lechem and that they just look at them. So it's just a little bagel. It's just like a big bagel. Okay, it's Dime Fisher. They're just little bagels.
And they do have Cheerios. You won't talk about the other.
Okay, they have Torah Lechem then. Now, and so he used to. He continues to say that they have Torah Lechem, and he used to say hamoitzi in them. He said if they have Torah Lechem and you kaveh suda, so you make hamoitzi. He's changed about the last part, but whether you should make hamoitzi on it, because he says yes, they have Torah Lechem, but he holds now that they're not baked and they're only cooked, which is something we'll come into in a second. And therefore he wouldn't make hamoitzi. Now, so he stopped making hamoitzi. He stopped.
Okay,
It's the cereal.
No. The process is the same. The process is the same. But what it goes on.
Martin Luther King.
That's Wheaties.
Wheaties.
It's not. What it is that after it's cooked in liquid, it's cooked as a liquid, it then goes through a warm chamber where it gets its crunchy consistency. And it's up in the air whether that process that it goes through should be treated as a baking process, which is what it used to hold, or treated as a drying process, which is what it holds now.
Why do you change it? Who changed it?
Someone described him the process better, and he used to think that the process was a baking, and he now thinks that the process is just a drying process, not a baking.
What's the mitzvahs?
It's a drawing.
It's not. There's no clear way to describe.
What's the difference between drying and baking?
Drying is habitual.
Yeah, right.
What's the criteria that tells you one is drying, one is
The
baking?
company calls it drawing.
Okay, so
Are they halacha?
Is it regular baked stuff before? Or is it
At what temperature would you say
That's
this is
different.
drying?
Like a
I have
baking.
all
Like a baking.
exact.
Have you ever been to the company?
okay, so
We're in Battle Creek.
okay, so in your name, let's say it used to be that there was a difference. Most people used to hold that it was not. It could not possibly be a mitzvah because it didn't have Torah Lechem.
Right.
And Rabbi first used to hold that it was, in which case he would hold that it has a kula that doesn't need passes so. Doesn't need passes so.
Just as
I don't know.
reactors say,
But
It's possible.
Gerson Best showed it to Dime Fisher. So
Okay.
you know the history.
okay, fine. Now, but it happens. So right now, as we stand today, nobody that we know of, no one that we know of holds make hamoitzi on it. That's for us the crucial criteria is we hold you don't make hamoitzi. Most people hold you don't make hamoitzi on it because it doesn't have a Torah Lechem. Because it doesn't have Torah Lechem. Rabbi first now holds that it doesn't make hamoitzi on it because it's not baked, which we'll come into in a second. So therefore, between everybody, we're covered that it does not have the kula pas palter, which means that it has the rules of bishul hakim. Okay, now for bishul hakim, we're off the hook also because it's not oil shulchan. So we're off from that side. Okay. But in Yonenu, we could have potentially, according to Rabbi First, his old way of thinking, it could have been that the food would be have a kula pas palter or a chumrah that during a Seres Mei Tshuva you should need it. Okay, potentially that kula has the chumrah that during a Seres Mei Tshuva you maybe should need it.
Or
Okay?
Shabbos.
Or maybe on Shabbos.
Do you know anything about grape nuts?
Is
Is
there
that
anything like
a
that?
different story?
I
It's
had no
kosher to
comment.
eat Bas Yisrael?
Huh?
No idea.
No, because
So
there's
Shabbos
some
brought
who
down,
hold you
no,
have to make
no.
a mitzvah.
Really?
Everything else, forget about
Don't
it.
think
Grape
we can
nuts.
say
Let's talk about it afterwards. Okay, we'll talk about it. Okay. Now a similar shiloh is negate. A similar shiloh is negate to a related shiloh to small hard pretzels. Okay, where there are those who have argued that the small pretzels that
You said some of the ones?
no, the very small, like
The one that looked like a Bible? Like a pretzel? The one that have the houses together?
maybe. Okay, we
The
could use that one.
Bachmans or the...
Yeah. So the
I'd like to know what you were talking about.
they hold that the reason why pasta is actually to have tire left because it's so small. Because it's so
No, I thought pasta.
So therefore, since it's because it's so small that that's why it doesn't have to. So therefore, a small pretzel would also, there are those who hold, does not have a tar lechem, okay? Which means if it doesn't have a tar lechem, means it can't be hamaitzi, which means that it's in the rules of bishlock. Okay, again, we're off the, they're not ola shechamachim. But for other people who hold that it does have a tar lechem, even in the small sizes, would say that it's has the kula pas palter, but again, potentially the chumras of Aseres Metshuva like that.
Yeah.
Why can't you just say, if you could use it for lechem mishnah, nobody's going to use Cheerios for lechem mishnah.
Okay.
You can say, define it like that.
It's not
That
Mashiach.
one.
If you can't use it for lechem mishnah, it's not Torah lechem.
If you can't use it for lechem mishnah, well,
What happens if you have a
you
broken
use
challah?
cake for
Yeah,
lechem
have
mishnah.
challah.
No.
You have to use something that's really hamaitzi, not possible
That's the whole
kisnin.
shine was egg matzahs.
So we're trying to say that something that's possible kisnin, like a cake or something like that, even if in certain ways it has such a form that it can't be hamaitzi no matter what you do with it.
We use egg matzahs.
That's what we're trying to judge it. You're coming from a different subject. Okay.
Well, if you need
The other thing is that there's another kind of food that could not be hamaitzi, which is what happens if the food was not baked. Okay, it was never baked. It was only cooked or deep fried.
Right.
Okay, so the Mechaber has 2 days about that in Hilchos Brachos. And the example we'll use is a donut. Okay, if you deep fry it, so his case is, which is what his case is blila ava, and you fry it. So you never baked it, you only fried it. So there's 2 days in the Mechaber. In the Mechaber, I'm gonna go to the Hilchos Brachos for a second. The Mechaber has 2 days, and he says it's therefore better to only eat it during the meal. That's what he says, because since it's a shaila, if it's hamoitzi or mezonos, he says it's better to only eat it during the meal, so you shouldn't have a stuffing of the brachas. The Rambam says that the minig is to make a mezonos on it. Okay, but it's just worth noting in the Hilchos Brachos of it before you run home and wash. In the Hilchos Brachos of the Mishnah Berurah, a couple halachas later mentions that if I told you that if you have flour and water with other things, let's say to make a cake that has a strong taste, it's considered possible to kiss it. The Mishnah Berurah says, not only that, if you have flour and water that are plain, but you fry them in oil to such an extent that they take on a very strong taste. So not only if the oil is mixed into the original batter can it be considered possible kisnin, but even if the oil comes in during the cooking process, that could also make it into possible kisnin. So if you have a donut, like most of our donuts, that they have a very strong oily taste to them,
Wontons.
they have a very strong oily taste to them, those things are considered possible kisnin. Not, even though the batter was plain flour and water, the batter is a very plain batter, it's a very bland batter, but the fact that you deep fry it in oil to a point that it gets a strong oily taste to it, which makes possible kisnin. In which case, which is most of our donuts, in which case, you don't make, even according to the more machmer shita, you would make a mazonos on any. Okay, so what I'm saying to you, the Mechaber said it's better to eat it during the meal, is not so negate to most donuts, because most donuts, they're possible kissin, not because of the cooking of it, but because of the oil.
Maybe the sugar in the dough anyway.
The sugar in the dough. My impression is that the dough's pretty bland.
Yeah.
But that's my impression. I'm not sure. I guess
Forget
it's
a wonton.
okay.
You fry wontons. It's flour and water. That's it.
Yeah, well, it's a crunchy little thing.
So crunchy and it gets that tom from the
Okay.
oil.
Okay, so now for brachas we're making. The Rambam says we say safek brachas hakol, and we would make a mazonos on it. Okay, so what would you say for hilchos b'shalakim? Okay, what would you say? Okay, so you're right. We're going to get off the. That's true.
Oh,
We're going to
let's get that out there. Yeah.
No. You're right. Which is we're Lamaisa going to get off the hook. That either it's going to be pas palta and we're going to be safe,
Or-
we're going to say it's not oil shulchan and we're going to be safe also. But what would you say should we consider it pas or should we not consider it pas? In Hilchas Brachos, we say Safek Brachos Lahakol, and we say that we make a Mazoin on it. You don't make Hamayt on it. Well, so should we say now the opposite minute? Say Safek Bishul Akum Lahakol, and say that it should be considered pas. We're not sure whether
And
this
the
cooked
kula
food should it be pas or should it be tafshel. So should we go lahakol on the Issa D'Rabbanan and say right? If we would have one that would be oil shulchan aruch, should we go lahakol on that and say the kula here is to say that it's pas. The kula there is to say that it's not pas. But should we say that no? The kula here is to say it's pas, or is that like, or are we like doing two things that are sort of opposites or funny, or do we not have a right to say that? Maybe bishlaka, we shouldn't just be. We're going to see later that some of bishlaka is lahakol.
Because it's not something that you have a statement on anyways. It's not something that you...
Is that a staple food?
It's not a staple food, so maybe you can go ahead and be
Okay.
makel with
It's a
that. But
question.
even though the other machaber was, one of the shitas was, you won't have the kula then of pas palter there, because he said they only have a kula when it's a staple food, but then it'll come out that it's a din of bishul.
Maybe. Okay, now I have to tell you, just as an aside, with Indian donuts, we'll talk about this at a different time, which is, there was a shiloh whether donuts should maybe be considered oil shulchan aruch, because they started making mini donuts that were oil shulchan aruch. Okay, but that's really for a different time. It's not this part of the shiloh, it's for a different shiloh. It's a different din that's...
Soba donuts, the little small soba.
We'll get to it. It's not negated to our shiloh. And there's one thing that I'm not doing, which we'll maybe do next halacha, maybe we'll just ignore it, which is
Those powdery ones.
one more case is those are different donuts. Those are not fried. Okay, but that's a
Those are
different.
like, they're baked.
Is another shiloh, which is bagels, which are cooked and then baked afterwards.
Bagels.
Which are the shiloh, whether those are how they fit into this din over here. Also, it's sort of negated to this and sort of to the next din, or maybe completely.
You also make them like that?
We're going to talk
Bagel
about that.
country.
If we get to
Boil
that,
them first?
Of course.
I don't know.
if we
Take you for a tour.
in Mitzvah Hashem, if we may do it next halacha. We'll see if we do it. Maybe not.
You tell them to make it just